Raised by Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I once met a kid when I was living in a foster care facility. That's the kind of prison they put you in if you're poor and have no parents. I was 13 and nobody knew this kid's age for sure. He was about the size of the 12-year-olds, and a few of us used to hang with him because he was really good at sports. The first time I ever heard of Dogman was from this kid, because he claimed that's who his parents were. Now, when you're locked into an institution like that, you get to hear lots of stories about who other kids claim their real family is. Maybe they claim their father is really a famous singer who paid off his pregnant girlfriend to put the kid in foster care. Maybe they claim their father is really the President of the United States, and he had the kid's mother terminated to shut her up, and that's how the kid ended up institutionalized. You learn early to act like you believe them, but you also learn early that those stories are not really true. The only time I ever started to actually believe a kid telling me a wild tale about their origin was this kid who claimed he was raised by a family of the Dogman. The kid in question, who we can call Marok, had difficulty with the English language, but he didn't have any kind of accent I'd ever heard before. He told me that one of the women who worked there had taught him English on her own. She took pity on him because initially he had been placed in bilingual education with Hispanic kids who all made fun of him because he knew even less Spanish than he knew English. I suppose these days they could give him a DNA test to figure out his ethnic origin, but back then, things weren't quite that invasive yet, and we still had some few privacy rights intact. He sort of looked Caucasian, he sort of looked Asian, he sort of looked part African, and he sort of looked part native. It depended on the angle you viewed him from, the expression on his face, or the light in the room. He could have been from any race or background, and so he was mostly treated like he was an alien or a monster. At first, I thought that was why he made up the story about being raised by some kind of family of werewolves. My group of friends in there were of mixed race origin too. We were, none of us, one single race, and we all used to get mockingly called the Heinz Gang, because the others said we were 57 varieties. The main difference between those of us in the Heinz Gang and those who were not is that the Heinz Gang, we were all smart kids. There's no group of kids looked down upon more in a general population than smart kids. Bullies hate smart kids, and everyone loves and obeys bullies. Smart kids generally don't bully others. They try to respond with reason. There's nothing more that normies and bullies hate than reason and clear thought. The philosopher and author Robert Anton Wilson used to say, there must be a biological evolutionary need for stupidity, otherwise it wouldn't be so prevalent in the world. Perhaps if intelligent people were protected and listened to, we'd reach the next stage in our human evolution too quickly. Maybe the world really is a simulation or a video game. That might explain why the majority are always non-thinking, non-player characters following the lead of the cruelest. Marok was respected and treasured by those of us in the Heinz Gang because he had what we lacked: physical prowess. He wasn't the tallest kid, he wasn't the strongest, and he wasn't the fastest, but he was the best overall athlete in the institution. Nobody wanted to fight him. At least not after a while. The last kid that picked a fight with him ended up being moved to a hospital, and then presumably to a different institution. All I know is that kid never returned, with Marok in our group. We still faced constant insults, but sticks and stones don't break bones. The cruel humiliations we faced before his arrival had almost entirely ceased. Sure, we still got called freaks, but we wore the name proudly. Gabagooble, we accept you, one of us. For the time we were locked in there together, Marok and I were sort of best friends. Obviously, a lot of it was self-preservation, and some of it was by chance. We were assigned to the same bunk beds. Marok told me he was not human, that he belonged to the Dogman. I asked him why he looked like a human then, and he shrugged. All he remembered was roaming free with his family, eating the raw flesh of those born to feed them, and sleeping with his mother and his brothers and his sisters. Then one day there were loud explosions in the air and his clan took off running in all directions. He saw some of them fall, bleeding, while others seemed to get away. He was captured by these strange, hairless, upright monkeys wearing camouflage, and brought to this prison to be held captive in an entire zoo of upright, hairless monkeys. That's how he saw the foster care system, a zoo of upright, hairless monkeys. Because I was a 13-year-old, I took most things quite literally, and I spotted holes in Marok's story. If he roamed wild through America, then how did he even know what a monkey was? We don't have monkeys roaming through the United States. Marok looked at me strangely and said, you must not know much about the United States. According to Marok's view of things, we have tree-climbing monkeys here who are generally small. We also have other four-legged monkeys that are larger, and some very large upright ones. Several species of those, in fact. His clan would run from the large upright monkeys, although some of them were known to be gentle. There were red-haired ones known to eat his kind, and those were most feared. In fact, according to Marok, the only kind of monkey his clan had never seen before was the human kind. They were entirely unprepared for the assault on the family that resulted in his capture and imprisonment in the foster care system that he termed a zoo. Now, zoo was a concept Marok did not learn from his own people. That was a term he learned from us humans, as it seems we are the only species who derives entertainment out of the capture and imprisonment of other earthly beings. I remember saying to Marok that he must be a human too, since he looked like a human. I asked him if the others in his clan looked like him, and he sadly had to admit that they did not. They resembled each other, while he resembled us more. But still he held firm to his belief or assertion that he was not one of us. He was one of them. All of the time he had told me about the wolf people or the dog people, I was imagining that he was raised by wolves. This is because there are stories like that which I've read. Apparently this is a real thing that happens, where a pack of wolves come upon a human baby, and instead of making quick lunch of them, they'll raise the baby instead as though he were one of them. We once had a lesson about wolves in one of our classes, and I asked Marok afterward if the lesson was accurate or not. He was confused why I would ask him that question. Well, weren't you raised by wolves? I asked. Aren't you an expert on their lives? He looked at me with disappointment, as though all the things he had told me had fallen on deaf ears. I wasn't raised by wolves, he informed me as though I were an idiot. I was raised by a family of wolf people. It was only then when he began explaining that he had never been referring to the normal four-legged kind of canines loose in the wild. He was talking about upright walking wolves, a different species altogether. His people had intelligence. His people had culture. His people had traditions they passed down. And his people were of a noble and mysterious origin. Instead of pitying him for making up such grandiose claims about his past, I felt humbled and chastised. I had come to fully believe the stories this kid was telling me. No matter what would happen to him in that institution, he always had a sense of nobility about him, as though he had been born with it. He had an awareness of wisdom that humans don't pass down to each other. He truly was some other kind of being, and I stopped being his friend so much and became more his student. One day I approached Marok asking him how he thought he had ended up with the Dogman clan. He said he assumed he had been born into it. I suggested to him that he must have originated with a human family. Possibly his original family perished, and he was rescued by the wolf-headed people. Or possibly the wolf-headed clan stole him from a human settlement. He couldn't have been born naturally to them since he did not resemble them. My face didn't resemble them, but I could be taught to walk on my hind limbs same as them, he responded, describing his adopted, or in his mind original, family. He said they were silver-haired and tall as one of our teachers that he named, who was about 6 feet. Marok told me his people were brave, his people were honest, and so, therefore, they differed from my people. Like us, they possessed hands with opposable thumbs, but unlike us, they used their hands for noble and good reasons and causes. He honestly and sincerely seemed taken aback each time I would assert that he must be human. He never seemed to be able to consider such a concept seriously. If I am human, he asked me, why does the forest sing in my blood? Why can I not accept being caged here as the rest of you seem to? I didn't consider those questions as adequate answers, just as he didn't consider my questions logical things to ask. He had a different worldview than any other person I've ever been exposed to, even into the middle age I'm now living through. I am now in my 50s, and the older I get, the more I return to his notions and concepts and stories. I listen to various Dogman channels on YouTube now, including yours, and I'm surprised at how many conventions of the genre I first heard from Marok in the early 1980s. As far as I can tell, the Dogman was not a national myth back then. If anyone reading or hearing this can tell me or show me stories about the Dogman from the mid-80s or earlier, I would deeply appreciate that. I know that some stories did exist here and there, but as far as my research has shown me so far, it was not something very widespread. I've seen local tales from the Great Lakes region, such as in Michigan and Wisconsin. I've read that there were legends of this kind in Pennsylvania as well. There were loup-garou and werewolf stories emanating from the Louisiana bayous, but the vast majority of the country seemed to regard the idea of canine-headed humans as something made up by Hollywood. If you trace it back further than that, there's really almost nothing until you reach the Middle Ages with the concept of cynocephaly, or dog-headed men. The Christian Saint Christopher has been depicted with a dog head, but that is mainly now considered a mistake or a typo. He was a Canaanite, or from the land of Canaan. The modern view is that this word was confused for or conflated with the word canine, and therefore the man was illustrated with a canine head. In or about the year 635 AD, the Book of Liang was completed in China by Yao Silian. It was a multi-generational work begun by his father Yao Cha. In the book, there is an island to the east of Fusang, said to be the island of the dog-headed people. Some interpret this island as actually being Japan. Others insist that the father-son team was referring to America, or an island near America. Of course, the concept that Chinese explorers had discovered America that early is not currently accepted by the mainstream, and this is all just speculation. If you trace things back even further than that, you do find canine or wolf or dog-headed figures in much of ancient mythology. Not just Anubis from Egypt, but also the dog-headed people who the ancient Greeks believed populated the continent of India. My curiosity is raised by the long periods in which such people were not spoken of at all. How can they be accepted as real for so long, and then never be spoken of at all for an equally long period? How can one account for the huge gaps in the history of such things being thought to exist? And then one morning, I awoke with a feeling of having remembered the answer to my own question. I had been dreaming of Marok that morning, and a few shades and shadows of the dream mercifully remained in my mind, enough to satisfy me that there is, in fact, a logical answer for this question. Marok had spoken of the other world that his people often stayed in. He would also call it the natural world. I used to just think he meant the forest as opposed to the city, but in the dream, all of the pieces came together in my mind. The natural world had no hairless monkeys in it, he said. People invade the forest all the time. He couldn't have just meant the forest. Another time, he said that he never would have been captured if his people hadn't ventured out of the other world. He had been specific about his capture. It did not happen in a city. It happened in the forest. So the forest was not the other or the natural world that he was referring to. The forest was on the outskirts of man's world. It belonged to us, whereas the natural world, or the other world, belonged to the wolf people. Was he talking about another dimension? Another coexisting reality? Another frequency or resonance which manufactures an alternate world? Possibly, but I don't really think so. I think his people mainly live underground, but not in the kind of underground that we usually think of. Not in cave systems or underground passageways. I know he did tell me about subterranean passages, but they were always leading from our world to his, or his world to ours. His people would travel through the underground to reach us, but his world was not a dark one. His world was as bright as ours and forested, just the same as here. It sounds crazy, but maybe there are cavern systems that are actually lit and warmed in some way that we don't know about here on the surface. Please don't call me a lunatic fringe theorist, because I'm not insisting this is true. I'm just wondering, because he was not the first to talk about a bright and warm land under the ground. Just because it seems unlikely or even impossible to us surface dwellers does not mean it could not happen. What exists beneath volcanoes? Could there be vast chambers lit and warmed by hot lava flow? If that sounds silly and unscientific, it's because I'm silly and unscientific, but at least I'm open-minded. The strange, hairless, upright monkeys wearing camouflage who were supposed to have separated him from his family and placed him in foster care that Marok spoke of, who were they? I always imagined them as a group of hunters who came upon his people. Were they hunting the Dogman clan? Were they shooting in self-defense, thinking themselves under attack? Humans don't eat wolves for the most part. Could they have been trophy hunters? I remember asking one of my teachers if there were records of the people who placed Marok in their custody. She told me she was sure there were, but they were private, and not for me or anyone to look at. I believed Marok, but I was insatiably curious to understand better who he really was, where he really was from, and who it was that had separated him from the dog-headed people. The last time I saw Marok was in our dorm. I had the upper bunk, and he had the lower one. I woke up that night to hear him screaming bloody murder. I leaned my head off the bunk to look down, but my head was pushed back by the big hand of a very gruff man in a military uniform. He told me, "Nothing to see here, kid. Go back to sleep if you know what's good for you." I pulled my head back and lay there still, listening, terrified. I stared at the ceiling, afraid to see any more than I already had. But in my brief glance, I had seen a number of military men, possibly 4 or 5 or 6, all standing around our bunk bed. Some of them stared down at Marok. Others were bent over and I guess grabbing him or some such thing. I wanted to scream just like he was screaming. I wanted to do something, but these were very frightening men, and my heart was beating faster and harder than it had ever beat before. Were they killing him? Were they hurting him? I didn't know what was happening, but I knew it felt abnormal to lay there still while it happened. I heard the men pulling Marok out of bed. I watched in my peripheral vision as they carried him away. I heard all the things Marok screamed, but I remember only 2 parts of what he said now into my middle age. I heard him scream my name, asking me for help. I still hear that in my nightmares. I relive my betrayal of him over and over and over. He asked for my help, and I did nothing. Absolutely nothing. The other thing that I remember him screaming was, "Not again. Not again." This wasn't the first time Marok had been dragged away by men wearing camouflage. I wonder where he was taken. I wonder where he is today, or if he's even still alive. I wonder to this day whatever happened to the boy who claimed that he was raised by Dogman. This episode would have been impossible without the kind contributions of our once and future channel member, Kathy Barrickman. Thank you, dearest Kathy, who sponsors Cynocephali. We couldn't continue to be if it weren't for Kathy B. I just rhymed B with B. How was that? Please join us in saluting and thanking the wonderful Wildcat Wolverine Werewolf Queen herself, Kathy Barrickman, who recently moved to a lovely new house located directly next to the Dogman Woods. Kathy is so cool, she got to watch this episode yesterday. You too can be like Kathy Barrickman by clicking the join link below and becoming a $10 channel member. Here's PQ Ribber as Dr. Death to explain how you too can receive all our perks and be honored too. Doctor?
Thanks for watching till the end. If you liked what you saw, please consider clicking like on the video or sharing it. You can become a channel member by clicking the join link below. Then you can check our community page to find the links to 10 hours or more of secret, uncensored Dogman stories too wild to be told on this channel. Your other option is to join our paid subscribers club at peterbernard.com. That's Peter's homemade club, where he will personally email you the links as well as occasional secret club messages. You may also be included as an executive producer in a future episode. You have a scary experience you want to tell us about? You can email us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or else call our Scary Stories voicemail hotline at 804-LESS-SCARY. The machine cuts off every few minutes, so if you have a long story, please keep calling back and we'll piece it together later on. Good night and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.